and today I'm going to talk about why the Camino pilgrimage is different to doing a trek in your home country. This topic has come up a lot since I've returned home from my pilgrimage in Spain back in 2017. A lot of people have said to me, why didn't you just do a trek in one of the mountains in Australia or something similar to that? And it really shows that the intricacies of being on the Camino Trail aren't very well understood by many people, and I've been astonished that the general beliefs of people with the Camino are so vague, and maybe I've been lucky to learn a few things about it, and having done it, of course. And I think in this video I'll be able to list about 5 or 6 points why the Camino pilgrimage is so dramatically different to doing a trek in your home country. So as you might understand, I'm from Australia. There's many wilderness walks and outback walks that you can do. Actually, there's one near where I live in North Queensland called the Thosborn Trail, where you walk for 4 days across an island mountain range, and that's a pretty awesome thing to experience. And I know in USA there's many too, like that Pacific Crest Trail. There's many others that you can do, but I think it's wrong to say that doing a general trek in your home country is like the same as the Camino pilgrimage. They're very different, and in this little video I'm going to touch on a few reasons why that is. Okay, the first reason, in Australia we have a very different history to Europe. There's a long prehistory, so in other words, no or very little written evidence of the history. We had indigenous peoples, and we didn't have the same level of I guess historical reminders of the past. There are a lot of special sites like rock art sites, but those things aren't so significant to an Anglo-Saxon person like me, or someone with a European ancestry as me. They would be very significant to an indigenous person. So in terms of my own ancestry and history, being somewhere like the Camino, where you've got castles, bridges and cathedrals and all this hugely profoundly significant historical features on a personal level, I think that seeing all those things makes it much different to walking, for example, in the Australian bush, where you're very unlikely to see anything apart from trees and rocks. And while the environmental features might be very significant to an indigenous person, for me and for, I would say, the majority of Australians, we don't understand it at that level that a indigenous person would, and it's just not as significant to us for a range of reasons. Okay, the other factor is the Camino is not a camping or an outdoor experience. It can be, but it isn't really. It's an experience where you walk with other pilgrims, and you stay in albergues, which are rooms allocated for pilgrims who walk the trail. So generally people don't take tents and a whole plethora of outdoor equipment like you would on those massive treks in the USA, for example. So it's a very different, it's a shared experience. So you're sleeping in the same albergue as like 80 people some nights. You interact with people more. It's not an individual survival experience where you're just in your own little tent and you never see another person. It's not like that. You see people and you meet and interact with so many people from all over the world. Okay, the third factor is the Camino pilgrimage is a Christian pilgrimage. So there's that theme of faith is very common. It isn't, while some people or a fair percentage of people don't do it for religious reasons, a lot do as well. And realistically, what you're doing is walking from cathedral to cathedral. So if you've got no interest in Christianity, then it sort of raises a few questions of maybe why you're there. I've been very lucky to see some amazing places on the Camino journey that I did back in 2017, and like in Leon, I got had a special experience with many fellow pilgrims where we had a blessing ceremony. We had a pilgrim's blessing, and that was a really great thing for me to be a part of. And I know if I did an outback walk in Australia, that wouldn't have happened. I will say though that some people have raised an argument or I guess a point of view with me that you can find God anywhere, and I know that I understand that perspective, but I still think it is different if you are walking in this hugely historically significant area that so many great people have followed this tradition for so long of walking the trail. I think there's something really profoundly special about that, which just simply doesn't exist in places like Australia or New Zealand, where the history has been so different. So that's definitely a point. The other factor is you're interacting with a very different culture. The Spanish culture has a lot of idiosyncrasies, and it's great to be a part of that for the time you're walking the trail. And you learn many things. You have to adapt to your surroundings, and it's just a really great new thing to be a part of. Like in Australia, we've had a settled country for only about 200 years. So this country in Spain, it's obviously goes back way further, and you've got several different eras during the Reconquista that are very interesting to learn about. So having that real presence of being in that place and being where all these battles were fought, and the people have had to undergo all this change, and it created such a big legacy for the future of Europe. Being in that area is really special. Okay, and the last point I want to raise is environmentally, it's very difficult to complete the same type of a trek in Australia or even Asia as it is in Europe, because you can look at any distance on a map and then just say, yeah, I'll walk this far. But it doesn't work that way, because the climate and the landscape is much different somewhere like Spain compared to Australia or even a Southeast Asian country, where you've got like 100% humidity in some places, no reliable water sources for hundreds of kilometers. You've got dangerous animals. You've got no human interaction for just endless amounts of time. Whereas in Spain, it's not like that. You will usually see someone every few kilometres. There's towns that are scattered throughout the country. The climate is quite friendly. It can be very hot in the middle of Spain, but I know it's not the same as Australia, where if you're outside for like 4 hours, you could die. It's so hot in some places in Australia. Whereas on the Meseta, yeah, it's hot, but you're going to survive if you are sensible. So that's a factor. You can't just walk anywhere in Australia for like 30 or 40 days. In my opinion, if you have great survival skills, maybe you could, but I just think it's a very unrealistic thing to try and accomplish. There are some places in Australia that are different, like for example in Tasmania, you've got a really cool mountainous type of terrain, and people do long treks there, and there's some certain places in New South Wales which have some similarities to that, where they have a more temperate climate, and you've got some water sources and good places to set up camp. And I understand technically it's possible in some places, but that doesn't mean everywhere it is. If you try doing that in Northern Territory or Cape York, you'll die. You're dead. There's no two ways about it. So it's good to be realistic about what places offer the opportunity, and not just generalize as though everywhere's the same and it's just distance on a map. It isn't. Okay, so they're the main points I want to raise. I guess the irony of this is this type of a video will probably reach people who already know this type of stuff, because you've taken that active effort to learn about the Camino. So maybe you know it already, and the people who don't know obviously don't know because they don't learn anything about it, so they may not see this at all. So even if it reaches a few people, I hope you can learn something from this, and I hope you can understand why the Camino pilgrimage is much different to just doing an ordinary outdoors trek in your home country. It is vastly different. So I'll recap the main reasons. A, the historical factor is much different when you are walking in these places that have had massive change and influence on the future of Europe as a consequence of what occurred there. B, it's not an individual camping experience in the outdoors, it's a shared pilgrim experience, and that is very special. C, it's a Christian pilgrimage, so if you have faith and if you are someone who holds that dear to your heart, you're going to have a very special experience being in these magnificent cathedrals and being around fellow Christians. D, you're learning about a much different culture, a very special long culture that has a long history, and there's many idiosyncrasies to it, and it's very fascinating to learn a range of things about it. And E, the climate and landscape is relatively forgiving, so you can realistically take on really long amounts of time in the environment and still survive. Okay, so they're the main reasons that I think the Camino pilgrimage is different to just doing a regular trek in your home country. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and please check out my other videos about the Camino.